We are going to begin this evening with a vicious attack that again raises questions about the criminal justice system.
She was a vibrant 22-year-old mother, navigating the dating scene after ending her 7-year relationship with Alonza, her high school sweetheart. Alonza had moved on as well and was deeply involved with someone new. Although Tyshika and Alonza's relationship had ended, they managed a harmonious co-parenting arrangement for their 2-year-old son, agreeing to alternate weekends. This setup gave Tyshika the chance to explore new romantic possibilities for herself. But just 2 months after sparks began to fly with a new man, the promising new chapter in her life was tragically cut short when she was found lying face up on her bedroom floor, bludgeoned to death.
You gotta calm down, tell me what's going on.
As Alonza approached Tyshika's apartment, he knocked several times while calling her name, but received no response. The minutes were ticking by, so he decided to test the doorknob, and to his surprise, it turned easily under his hand. The door was unlocked. A wave of unease swept over him. It was uncharacteristic of Tyshika to be so careless with her security. With his son by his side, he cautiously stepped inside. The enveloping silence of the apartment was unsettling. "Tyshika!" he called out again, his voice cutting through the quiet, yet still no reply. The living room, meticulously kept, showed no signs of a disturbance, offering no hints to the ominous feeling slowly settling in his gut. With each step toward Tyshika's bedroom, the air seemed to thicken until he was met with a sight that would haunt him forever. There, lying face up on the floor, was Tyshika. The moment was surreal, time standing still as Alonza's scream, a mix of fear and despair, filled the room. "Tyshika!" he called out, but she didn't respond. Instinctively, he scooped up his son, fleeing the nightmare behind them. Tyshika's neighbor, Teresa, who lived across the hall, was alarmed by the unsettling noises just outside her apartment. Following the sounds, she heard a distressed voice exclaim, "Oh no!" Stepping outside, she encountered a visibly distraught Alonza, who confided, "My girl's on the floor," indicating something was terribly wrong. Compelled by concern, Teresa accompanied Alonza back into the apartment to confirm his grim discovery. There, she saw Tyshika lying lifeless on the floor, her face obscured by a pillow. Upon removing the pillow, it became clear to Teresa that Tyshika had passed away. Overwhelmed and shaken, they both retreated from the apartment and immediately called 911.
Where? Take a deep breath.
Hurry up, hurry up.
On the call, Alonza's voice was fractured by emotion, his words tumbling out in a frantic plea for help, the specifics of their location getting lost amidst his distress. It took every shred of composure he had left to convey the urgency, to say that it was Tyshika, the mother of his child, who lay lifeless. He recounted the disturbing discovery to the operator, each word a testament to the gravity of the loss. This heartbreaking moment posed a haunting question that lingered long after the sirens faded. Why Tyshika? Speaking of haunting, today's video is sponsored by Aura. Ever get one of those strange text messages from USPS saying they have a package for you? Click this link to confirm. USPS never sends those types of messages. That's spam from someone who has targeted you. They likely got your information from a data broker or a data leak on the dark web. Do you know how much of your personal information is hanging out online for people who want to target you like this? I'm talking about your full name, phone number, home address, email address, information about your relatives, and more. And data brokers, which are companies that are in the business of making money from your personal details, are selling your information to scammers, just like the scammers who sent that USPS text message to you. I've gotten those messages too. That's why I turned to Aura. I've been using Aura to protect myself from identity theft online. These days, it's no longer a question of whether your information gets into the wrong hands. It's a matter of when. And when it does, it can turn your life upside down. When both my mom and husband had their identity stolen, it was a wake-up call for me. When I did a little digging on my own information, I was shocked at how much detail was out there. It was alarming. Aura reaches out to the data brokers that have my information, and it actively takes steps to have it removed by automatically sending opt-out requests to them on my behalf. Ara uncovered more than 18 data brokers that were actively selling my personal information and alerted me that one of my email addresses was found on the dark web. Cleaning up my information not only helps to reduce the amount of spam I get, but it protects me from hackers like the ones sending that sneaky USPS text message who could use this information to access my personal accounts and sensitive information. But that's not all. With Ara, I also enjoy a suite of features like antivirus, VPN, password management, parental controls, identity theft insurance, and more. It's a breeze to set up, and the cherry on top, I get all these perks bundled together at one price that doesn't break the bank. Ara brings it all together into one solution. If you sign up through my link right now at ara.com/sleuthylucy, Ara will give you a 2-week free trial. For a more direct route, you can simply click the link in the description below. June 7, 2004. On a quiet summer afternoon, the serene ambiance of Cambridge, Maryland, a quaint town nestled by the Chesapeake Bay, was abruptly broken. At precisely 1:20 p.m., the peace was pierced by a frantic call to the Dorchester County's emergency services line.
Dorchester County 911, you need police call. You gotta calm down, tell me what's going on.
Please come to,
Where? Take a deep breath.
hurry up, just hurry up.
What's wrong?
My baby mother is laying on the floor.
Alonza Dennis struggled to make his words clear, his voice choked by fear, and Tyshika's address momentarily eluded him.
Come on now, take a deep breath.
Where am I at? Where am I at? What's this place called? Legislative apartment.
What's wrong? What's the address?
Hurry up.
You need to tell me where at the legislative apartment.
Thanks to the quick thinking of a neighbor, Alonza managed to relay the address to the emergency operator, who promptly sent officers to the scene. Upon their arrival to Leonard's Grove Apartments at the 2300 block of Hudson Road, Alonza was there to guide them to Tyshika's doorstep. The officers instructed Alonza to remain outside as they entered the silent, seemingly vacant apartment. Inside, everything was meticulously arranged, with no sign of disarray from the entrance through to the living room, suggesting a tranquil domestic life abruptly interrupted. The grim discovery was made in Tyshika's bedroom. Her body, lifeless and battered, lay on the floor, her face covered by a pillow. The officer searched for any signs of life, but sadly, Tyshika had already passed away. Tyshika Askins was born on August 23, 1981, in Cambridge, Maryland. Known for her reserved nature, those close to her were invariably drawn to her fun-loving and silly personality, which made her a joy to be around. Raised in Cambridge by her devoted single mother, Diane, Tyshika grew up in a household filled with love and resilience. As Diane's only child, she ensured that their home was a nurturing and warm environment. This loving setting helped shape Tyshika into an affectionate and spirited individual cherished by all who knew her. In her teenage years, her striking beauty and charismatic personality made her the focus of many admirers. But it was in her freshman year of high school that Tyshika felt the stirrings of a deeper connection, believing she had found her soulmate in Alonza Dennis, a charming sophomore with a passion for wrestling. To Tyshika, Alonza's appeal was undeniable. Beyond his athletic prowess, it was his physical appearance that caught her attention. She thought he was cute. According to Tyshika's best friend, Danielle, Alonza was always around during their high school days. And over the course of their high school years, Diane's home became a welcoming space for Alonza and Tyshika's growing bond. Diane regarded him as almost a son. After Tyshika graduated from South Dorchester High School in 1999, she began pursuing her career in healthcare. From a young age, she knew she wanted to help others. Even as Tyshika pursued her nursing assistant degree, her relationship with Alonza flourished. Soon after, the couple would move in together. When she turned 20, Tyshika and Alonza were ready to embark on a new chapter together, parenthood, as Tyshika was indeed pregnant. The announcement of their pregnancy was met with an outpouring of excitement and support from their family and friends, all eager to celebrate the impending arrival. Tyshika and Alonza were inseparable, united by a deep love for each other that only grew stronger with time. And with each passing day, the anticipation of their child's arrival heightened. Then on a memorable Easter Sunday in 2000, their joy was made complete with the birth of a beautiful baby boy. Alonza was by Tyshika's side every step of the way, welcoming his son into the world with open arms. From that moment on, he embraced fatherhood wholeheartedly, becoming an exemplary dad. Friends often remarked on his devotion, just as they celebrated Tyshika's pride and joy in her new role as a mother. By 2001, both Tyshika and Alonza had found their footing in their respective careers. Tyshika was working as a certified nursing assistant at Mallard Bay Nursing Home, and Alonza in a position that he excelled in. For Tyshika, her son was the center of her universe, motivating every decision she made and every effort she undertook, all aiming at ensuring he had everything he needed for a happy and prosperous life. However, the bliss they found in family life was not destined to endure. The challenges of young parenthood began to weigh heavily on their relationship, introducing a stress that neither was fully prepared for. Their union was soon tested by trials of infidelity, including the jarring news of Alonza expecting a child with another woman. Faced with such deep betrayals, Tyshika found the strength to make a heart-wrenching decision. She decided to dissolve their romantic ties. Nevertheless, they managed to amicably navigate their differences to establish a co-parenting arrangement, allowing Alonza to spend every other weekend with their son. Alonza was determined to remain an active presence in his son's life, even after his separation from Tyshika. This arrangement, for a time, seemed to maintain a delicate balance between them, affording Tyshika moments of personal freedom every other weekend. This newfound space allowed her to enjoy leisure time, connect with friends outside of work, and cautiously step back into the dating scene. During her weekends to herself, Tyshika often spent time with her close friend from work, Lisa. They shared a deep connection, frequently turning to each other for guidance and insights, especially regarding their romantic relationships. Lisa was facing challenges in her long-standing relationship with her boyfriend Richard and found invaluable support in Tyshika's advice, seeking her perspective to navigate the difficulties of ending her troubled relationship. During the spring of 2004, Tyshika was in the beginning of a new relationship of her own. But on June 7th, this facade of normalcy was abruptly disrupted, following a seemingly ordinary weekend just after Alonza's time with their son. Coinciding with her mother Diane's birthday, Tyshika had enjoyed a day filled with shopping and celebration, blissfully unaware of the dark turn her life was about to take. June 7th, 12:30 p.m. Concerned when Tyshika failed to arrive at his mother's house to pick up their son as planned, Alonza drove to her apartment. Ascending up the stairs to apartment 302, he was met with an unsettling sight. Tyshika's front door was unlocked. With caution, Alonza opened the door, calling out for Tyshika, but received no answer. He ventured further, scanning the living room and the kitchen, yet the silence persisted. "Tyshika," he called again, his voice echoing through the emptiness. His heart sank as he neared Tyshika's bedroom, where he was confronted with a horrifying scene. Tyshika lay on the floor, her body still. In a panic, Alonza scooped up his son, dashed from the apartment, and dialed 911. Breathless and shaken, he struggled to articulate what he had discovered to the operator. Assistance from a neighbor enabled him to provide the crucial details. Immediately following, he urged the operator to take swift action. Awaiting the arrival of the authorities outside Tyshika's apartment, Alonza guided the officers to the unsettling open door upon their arrival. Officers arrived knowing the severity of the scene, so they proceeded with caution, finding the apartment in pristine condition, a stark contrast to the grim discovery awaiting them. Tyshika's bedroom bore the brunt of the violence, her body marked by brutality, her face and eyes bludgeoned. The officers immediately searched for any signs of life, only to confirm the devastating truth. Tyshika had met a tragic and violent end. Upon discovering the grim scene, officers wasted no time in calling for homicide detectives to take over the investigation. As the police secured the perimeter, the arrival of the detectives coincided with an escalating sense of chaos outside Tyshika's apartment, compounded by the gathering of family members drawn by concern and dread. In the midst of this turmoil, the officers initiated a more in-depth interrogation of Alonza just outside the apartment. When asked about his relationship with the victim, he responded, "She's my ex and the mother of my son," promptly identifying her as Tyshika Askins. As emotions ran high, Tyshika's father arrived on the scene and was permitted to enter the apartment to make a formal identification, a somber task that fell to him in the wake of the tragedy. The devastating news of Tyshika's death was relayed to Diane by Alonza's sister through a tearful phone call. Diane, in a state of shock and disbelief, hurried to the apartment complex where the sight of numerous police cars starkly confirmed the reality of the situation. Upon her arrival, the depth of her grief was intense. Surrounded by flashing lights and somber faces, Diane was consumed by an overwhelming sense of loss and the haunting question of who could have harmed her only daughter, the child she had poured her heart and soul into raising. In those disturbing moments, the painful truth set in. Tyshika was gone. The emotional turmoil peaked as Tyshika's sister, Nakia, begged the officers to let her into the apartment. However, her request was denied in an effort to spare her from the harrowing sight. Amidst the heartache, Tyshika's father took on the difficult role of supporting both Nakia and Diane, agreeing that it was best for them to avoid the distressing scene upstairs. In the process of examining the apartment, the homicide detectives found no immediate signs of disarray until they stepped into Tyshika's bedroom. There, the scene shifted dramatically. A large pillow had been deliberately positioned to cover Tyshika's face and upper body, signaling a struggle had occurred. Two detectives, trained in the nuances of crime scene analysis, this detail was telling. The positioning of the pillow suggested a personal connection between the assailant and Tyshika, hinting at the perpetrator's emotional distress or their unwillingness to confront the brutal reality of their actions. The chaos in the bedroom indicated to detectives that she fought valiantly. She had a large wound on her forehead, red marks on the right side of her face, and red fingerprints were visible on her neck. Her eyes were swollen shut, and her lips had been split. There also appeared to be dried blood on her shirt. These injuries led detectives to believe she may have been bludgeoned to death. However, when one of the detectives checked the whites of her eyes, he immediately noticed small red and purple freckle-like spots. This immediately steered the detectives down the path that Tyshika was likely strangled to death instead. In their efforts to preserve the evidence, detectives promptly secured Tyshika's hands with evidence bags, aiming to capture any DNA from the assailant that might have been trapped under her nails during the struggle. And they took photos to capture the scene. Given the presence of the large pillow, strategically concealing her injuries, and no forced entry into the apartment, the homicide detectives quickly became confident that Tyshika knew her killer. They determined that she had to have let him in. When the coroner arrived to take the body, the detectives turned their attention to the clues that were present in the apartment. The bedroom bore witness to a fierce struggle. Items from the dresser had fallen, perfume bottles scattered across the floor, window treatments torn from the wall as if she was attempting to escape through the window, the bed covers in disarray, and the unmistakable imprint of the sole of her shoe marked the dresser. These clues led the detectives to theorize that Tyshika had used the dresser for leverage in a desperate attempt to escape, suggesting the attacker was behind her and she was fighting back with everything she had, kicking and pushing against the dresser and him in a bid for freedom. As they scoured the apartment for clues, one detective's attention was drawn to an anomaly in the otherwise orderly space: an orange juice container on the counter and its cap lying separately on the kitchen floor. This detail seemed inconsistent in an apartment where everything else was meticulously placed. There were no dishes on the counter. Everything was wiped down. This was highly suspicious to the detective. Calling over his partner, both detectives agreed the scene was peculiar. The kitchen was pristine with no dishes out of place and every surface cleaned, yet the misplaced orange juice container and its cap stood out as a deliberate oversight. Deciding to probe further, They photographed and bagged the container and cap to send to the Maryland State Crime Lab for DNA and fingerprints, hoping this might lead them closer to understanding the sequence of events. This piece of evidence began to shape their theories, offering a potential lead in the unraveling of the crime. As the detectives wrapped up their investigation at Tyshika's place, the questions loomed. Who would have wanted to kill this young mother? And what would be their motive for doing so? Seeking clarity on the events leading to Tyshika's tragic death, detectives swiftly shifted their focus to Alonza, asking him to come down to the station for further questioning. Complying with their request, Alonza left his son in the care of Tyshika's family and went to the station. At the station, he was led into an interrogation room where he fully cooperated, though he was clearly distressed. The detectives began establishing a timeline, asking, "When did you last talk to Tyshika?" Alonza recounted that their last conversation was around 7 p.m. the previous night. He explained that Tyshika had agreed to pick up their son at his mother's house by 12:30 p.m. the following day, after his weekend visit. He then detailed his own movements, noting that after arranging this with Tyshika, he dropped his son off at his mother's home and spent the night at his girlfriend, Janelle's place. "Were you there all night?" the detectives pressed, to which Alonza confirmed yes. He continued explaining that he returned to his mother's house the next morning only to find that Tyshika had not picked up their son. After unsuccessful attempts to contact her, he packed up his son's belongings and drove to Tyshika's apartment. Upon arrival, Alonza said he became unsettled finding her front door unlocked. He said he entered and made the grim discovery of Tyshika's body on her bedroom floor. Alonza explained that he immediately ran outside to call 911. When the detectives asked, "Did you check on her?" Alonza responded that he did not. Concerned for his son, he didn't want the child to see his mother in such a state, so he quickly picked him up and ran out of the apartment. The detectives then directly asked Alonza, "Are you involved with Tyshika's death?" Taken aback by the accusation, he firmly denied any involvement, asserting, "No, there is no way." Keen to clear any suspicion, he readily agreed when the detectives requested a DNA sample. Eager to demonstrate his innocence, he also allowed them to take his fingerprints after the DNA swab was completed. Throughout the interview, detectives found Alonza to be cooperative and his responses compelling, yet they remained cautious in drawing conclusions. To probe deeper, they inquired about his current relationship with Tyshika. Alonza explained that although their romantic relationship had ended, they maintained a cordial rapport for the sake of co-parenting. Then the conversation shifted, as detectives asked Alonza if he could think of anyone who might have wanted to harm Tyshika. Alonza expressed doubt, noting that Tyshika was well loved, but he suggested that they speak with Lisa, one of Tyshika's closest friends from work. He mentioned that Lisa would be privy to any personal conflicts or drama in Tyshika's life, given the amount of time they spend together. Although the detectives conducting the interview found Alonza somewhat credible, their colleagues observing from another room were not convinced by his account. The detectives, who were watching the interview behind a two-way mirror, felt Alonza's statements and behavior were a bit inconsistent. At points during the discussion, he would become uncontrollably emotional and then would abruptly stop. They felt like he was pretending to cry. Seeking to corroborate Alonza's statement, they reached out to his girlfriend Janelle concerning Alonza's whereabouts around the time of the murder. She confirmed that he was indeed there with her that night, watching a movie. She said that they went to bed around midnight and that he left her place to go to his mother's the next morning. Alonza's account appeared to check out, leading the detectives to release him. However, he was not yet cleared of suspicion pending the results of the DNA tests, and there was a chance Janelle might have been covering for him. But given his somewhat disingenuous demeanor during his interview, detectives felt strongly that Alonza had something to do with Tyshika's death, and he had no idea just how much evidence detectives had collected from the scene. The detectives made a concerted effort to gather statements from everyone connected to the case, including Diane, Tyshika's mother. At the police station, they extended their condolences. "We are sorry for your loss, ma'am. Can you think of anyone who might have wanted to harm your daughter?" Diane responded, "No," describing Tyshika as the most loving and generous person in the world. Seeking more specific information, the detectives probed further. "What about Alonza? Do you think he could have done anything to hurt her?" Diane emphatically stated, "No way, they had their issues, but he wouldn't do something like this." "When was the last time you saw Tyshika?" they continued. "We were shopping just yesterday," Diane recalled. She was her usual happy self, excited to pick up her son the following day. The detectives then asked, "Did Tyshika have any other plans for the evening?" Diane replied, "She did mention that she might be hooking up with someone, a guy she started seeing sometime around April." "Do you know how to contact this new guy?" the detectives asked, to which Diane replied, "No." Seeking to identify Tyshika's new romantic interest, detectives shifted their focus to analyzing the evidence they had collected from her apartment. The detectives had lifted a number of fingerprints from the scene, the most important of which came from that orange juice container found in the kitchen. They also recovered DNA from Tyshika's shirt and obtained additional DNA from under her fingernails. The detectives knew they would have to wait for some time for the lab to develop the DNA profile, but they anticipated the fingerprint results to come back pretty quickly. While they awaited the results, the detectives decided to take another listen to the 911 tapes. They harbored intense skepticism about Alonza. While listening, the detectives had an overwhelming suspicion that it was rehearsed. During the call, Alonza suddenly didn't know where Tyshika lived. The detectives thought, "This is the mother of your baby, and you don't know the address to where she lives?" To gain further insights, detectives then turned their attention to Tyshika's neighbors, hoping for a fresh lead. Reports from residents of her apartment complex indicated that Tyshika had been seen visibly distressed in the parking lot the night before her murder, engaging in a heated conversation with a male driver of a beige sedan. Further investigations led to another resident who reported hearing shouting and yelling around the same time. The neighbor indicated that it was about 10:45 p.m., before the news of anything happening to Tyshika. Although this neighbor was unable to provide a visual description of the man in the tan car, detectives diligently recorded this information in their growing case file, considering it a potentially significant lead. Unfortunately, the lead turned out to be a dead end, prompting detectives to refocus their attention on the leads derived from Alonza's statement. With Alonza's insights in mind, the detectives shifted their focus to Lisa, the friend he had mentioned as being most knowledgeable about Tyshika's personal life. Eager to gather more information, they decided to bring Lisa in for questioning. When Lisa arrived, she revealed that Tyshika had recently started seeing someone new, a man Lisa herself had introduced to her. "What is his name?" the detectives asked. Upon inquiry, Lisa immediately provided the detectives with the contact details for Tyshika's new romantic interest. "His name is Anthony," she said. "Do you have his number?" the detectives asked. "Yes," she replied. Then the detectives promptly brought Anthony in for questioning. Anthony was cooperative and composed during the interview. "How long have you and Tyshika been seeing each other?" the detectives asked. "It's been about a month or so," Anthony replied. The detectives pressed further, inquiring if their relationship had been sexual, to which Anthony responded, "I wanted to, but we never got to that point." When asked about the last time he saw Tyshika, Anthony noted, "It's been a couple of days, around June 5th. He detailed that they had spoken on the day she was murdered, planning to meet if her day out shopping with her mother ended early enough. However, he fell asleep and never heard back from her." Anthony maintained that he had been at his mother's house that day and had called Tyshika from there. He said that his mother could verify his whereabouts. In line with the detective's requests, Anthony provided a DNA sample and fingerprints and was allowed to leave after his mother confirmed his alibi. Then the detectives sent the samples to the crime lab for analysis. Immediately following their discussion with Anthony, the detectives subpoenaed his and Tyshika's phone records, and everything he told them seemed to match. 3 days had passed with no solid leads in Tyshika's case. However, on the 4th day, detectives received a peculiar piece of evidence that redirected their focus squarely back to their prime suspect, Alonza. It was 4 days after their initial interview with Alonza when detectives received an unexpected call from him, claiming to have found something significant at his mother's house. Alonza asked that they come over right away. When the detectives arrived, Alonza said that his sister discovered a threatening letter hidden in the baby's bottle bag. Alonza presented them with the computer-printed letter his sister found in his son's bottle bag, which read, "Bitch, watch your back. We're going to get you," signed with a single initial, Q. The discovery of the letter was perplexing for detectives, who were particularly suspicious about why it had taken 4 days to surface when Alonza's son had been in his care since Tyshika's murder. Despite their initial doubts, they sent the letter for forensic analysis. However, when the results came back, they found no fingerprints or any other forensic evidence. The letter had been meticulously wiped clean, adding another layer of mystery to the investigation. The discovery of the letter, signed Q in the baby's bottle bag, was baffling. And even after its discovery, no one could explain how it got there or who Q might be. So detectives exhaustively searched for and interviewed any individuals with a name starting with the letter Q, but these efforts yielded no results. This lack of leads led the detectives to theorize that someone close to Alonza might have planted the letter to misdirect the investigation. Rather than diverting their attention, the letter only intensified the detectives' suspicions of Alonza. They began to speculate whether it was a deliberate attempt to create a smokescreen. Given the known details of Alonza and Tyshika's tumultuous breakup, spurred by his potential fatherhood with another woman and her unwillingness to accept it, detectives questioned if these personal conflicts could have escalated to violence. They pondered whether Alonza, unable to cope with the breakup, might have been driven to a point where he could not let Tyshika go, ultimately leading him to murder her. Then the detectives would receive a call that would change the course of the investigation. The call came from Anthony, Tyshika's new man. He had remembered something particularly crucial. When the detectives answered, Anthony recounted an incident a few days before Tyshika's murder, when he was at her place and her phone kept ringing. Tyshika consistently ignored it. When Anthony inquired if she needed to answer it, she dismissed it. And later that evening, as Anthony spoke to her on the phone after leaving, he heard loud banging on her door. Tyshika seemed to recognize the person, but brushed it off as a drunken annoyance, assuring Anthony that there was no need for him to return. The identity of the person at the door remained unknown to Anthony. For detectives, the mysterious Q in the letter and the unidentified man at Tyshika's door complicated the investigation further. As detectives delved deeper, Anthony speculated that the man at the door was likely Alonza, troubled by Tyshika moving on with someone new. This lead gained credence when detectives revisited Alonza and his girlfriend Janelle's statements. They had claimed to be asleep throughout the night of the murder, but this new timeline suggested that Alonza might have had the opportunity to visit Tyshika's apartment, commit the crime, and return without Janelle noticing. On the morning of June 8th, the situation intensified when the detectives went to the medical examiner's office in Baltimore to view the autopsy. The results revealed Tyshika died from blunt force trauma combined with strangulation between Sunday night into Monday morning on June 7th, a time frame when Alonza claimed to be asleep. As the medical examiner handed over the fingernail clippings, she also told the detectives that strangulation is a method of causing death that typically requires about 4 minutes to be fatal. It is a very intentional and personal manner of death. This, coupled with the cryptic letter, cast further doubt on Alonza's alibi. Shortly after, the detectives received a tip that appeared to be the breakthrough they had been hoping for in the case. The detectives received an anonymous tip claiming Alonza had mysterious scratches on his body, suggesting a struggle might have occurred between him and Tyshika. Given the mounting evidence and discrepancies in his story, the detectives decided to bring Alonza in for another round of questioning, hoping to uncover the truth behind Tyshika's tragic death. When Alonza was brought into the interrogation room, they noticed a deep gouge on the knuckle of his right index finger. Upon observing this, they wasted no time confronting him about the scratches observed on his hand. Caught off guard, Alonza claimed ignorance about their origin. To further inspect, the detectives requested he remove his shirt. This revealed a long, deep scratch along his lower back at the waistline. He also had a scratch on his wrist and another significant scratch under his right bicep. When pressed for an explanation, Alonza was unable to provide one. Faced with this physical evidence, the detectives directly expressed to Alonza their belief in his involvement in Tyshika's murder. But Alonza maintained his innocence, denying any role in the crime. When detectives proposed he take a polygraph test, Alonza refused to participate. By this time, Alonza had retained an attorney who advised he could talk to them, but he would not submit to a polygraph test at that time. Several days later, Alonza called the detectives, attempting to explain the scratches on his body by claiming they resulted from rough sex with his new girlfriend, Janelle. However, when detectives questioned Janelle about that specific night, they directly asked her if she had caused the scratches. Janelle expressed doubt, stating she didn't believe she had scratched him. Alonza continued to insist that the scratches were a result of their intimate activities, but his insistence only served to make the detectives more skeptical of him. This inconsistency added to their suspicions and led them to scrutinize Alonza's involvement more closely. Despite these developments, detectives still lacked sufficient evidence to arrest Alonza. So, they refocused their investigation on the forensic evidence collected at the crime scene, particularly the orange juice container found out of place at Tyshika's apartment. Finally, the crime lab had returned the fingerprint analysis from the container. One set belonged to Tyshika, but the other set was unidentified. It didn't match Anthony, nor did it match Alonza. Baffled by the results, the detectives ran the prints through the national database. But to their surprise, no matches were found, leaving the detectives at a standstill and compelling them to continue their search for more definitive evidence linking the unknown fingerprints to the perpetrator. Meanwhile, detectives brought in Danielle, Tyshika's best friend since 6th grade, for questioning. They asked her about the last time she saw Tyshika. Danielle recalled that on June 6th, the night before the murder, Tyshika had visited her around 8 p.m. Together, they watched part of an NBA Finals game. About 30 minutes later, Tyshika said she was leaving to pick up Chinese food before heading home to wait for her son's return the following morning. She last saw Tyshika around 9 p.m. that evening. When asked if it was also the last time they spoke, Danielle confirmed it was. The following morning, according to Danielle, Alonza had called her in a panic because Tyshika hadn't shown up to collect their son as planned. This prompted Danielle to start making calls in an attempt to locate her friend, while Alonza headed to Tyshika's apartment with their child. The detectives then inquired about the nature of Tyshika and Alonza's relationship, particularly if they were getting along. What Danielle would say next deepened the detectives' suspicions about Alonza. She described Alonza as clingy and jealous, traits that intensified after Tyshika began dating Anthony. She revealed that although everyone believed they were getting along, the reality was quite different. They were actually not on good terms. Danielle revealed that Alonza was trying to reinsert himself into Tyshika's life, viewing Anthony as an obstacle. Despite Tyshika's efforts to ignore Alonza's frequent texts and calls, Alonza persisted and even resorted to stalking her, including unexpected visits to check if she was at home. According to Danielle, Tyshika wanted nothing to do with Alonza unless it concerned matters relating to their son. Following their interview with Danielle, the detectives were convinced that Alonza was involved with Tyshika's murder. However, the results of the fingerprint analysis raised questions. They began to wonder if he might have had an accomplice. Danielle's statement supported the possibility that the mysterious man Anthony heard at Tyshika's door could indeed have been Alonza. Her statement gave further credibility to the theory that Alonza's unresolved feelings and intrusive behavior might have played a significant role in the situation. Detectives now questioned the truthfulness of Alonza's alibi, which, though supported by his girlfriend Janelle, only covered them being asleep during the critical time frame when Tyshika was killed. Although witness accounts were increasingly pointing towards him, the absence of forensic evidence directly linking Alonza to the crime scene left the case unresolved. The fingerprints on the orange juice container remained a loose end, with one set belonging to Tyshika and the other unidentified and not matching Alonza. The investigation was at a critical juncture, requiring further evidence to definitively link Alonza to the murder or clear his name. And the detectives still awaited the DNA results from the clippings of Tyshika's fingernails, which had yet to return from the lab. In the meantime, the detectives were able to secure a warrant to search Alonza's apartment, where they discovered what appeared to be blood on a sock, pants, and shoes. There was even blood in one of his drains. They promptly swabbed the drain, collected the samples, and sent them to the crime lab for analysis. Detectives also seized a computer tower from the residence. Armed with new suspicions, detectives brought Alonza in for questioning a third time. In this session, Alonza agreed to a polygraph test, which he subsequently failed. According to the detectives, his answers were evasive and inconsistent, further casting doubt on his credibility, particularly concerning his whereabouts on the night of the incident. During the interrogation, Alonza's account began to unravel. Initially, he claimed to have spent the entire night at his girlfriend Janelle's house. However, under pressure, he admitted that after watching TV with Janelle, he switched cars with his cousin Kevin to go out, supposedly for a date or another engagement. This revelation raised significant suspicions among the investigative team. Janelle corroborated part of Alonza's story, stating that he was present when she was asleep at midnight and was again beside her when she woke up at 4:30 a.m. However, she could not account for his whereabouts during the intervening hours, a period Alonza now admitted to being away, despite previously claiming he had not left. This inconsistency, combined with his polygraph results, deepened detectives' doubts. They recalled a previous tip from neighbors about seeing a beige car outside Tyshika's apartment the night of her murder. When further investigating Alonza's account of car swapping, they learned the cousin's car was goldish, a shade that could easily appear beige under nighttime lighting conditions. The revelation about the car, together with the failed polygraph test, reinforced detectives' belief in Alonza's involvement. His changing stories about that night, from staying in to leaving for hours, and the suspicious car swap all pointed towards a deliberate attempt to mislead the investigation. These elements convinced detectives that Alonza Dennis was indeed responsible for Tyshika's death. On October 28th, the investigation led to a grand jury convening to examine the evidence. A grand jury has the power to recommend an indictment based on whether there is probable cause to believe that a crime was committed and that the suspect committed it. Probable cause is just enough evidence to make it more likely than not that a suspect committed the crime. Given the weight of the circumstantial evidence and the preliminary identification of blood on Alonza's clothing, in the month of November, the grand jury indicted Alonza, and detectives obtained a warrant for his arrest. Police arrested Alonza during a traffic stop without incident, a development that completely blindsided Tyshika's family. Diane, who had until then regarded Alonza almost as a son, was particularly shocked by the news. In the aftermath, Diane was granted temporary custody of her grandson, ensuring he remained cared for within the family during this tumultuous time. 2 months later, in January 2005, while Alonza remained in custody, the awaited forensic results finally came in. The detectives had no doubt the DNA would link Alonza to the murder. However, in a stunning development, the DNA from Tyshika's fingernails and shirt did not match. It was not Alonza. Furthermore, the substance found on his clothing was identified not as Tyshika's blood, but as animal blood. Faced with these new findings, authorities had no choice but to dismiss charges against him and release Alonza from jail. The revelation shocked Tyshika's family and friends, plunging them into grief as they struggled with the reality that the investigation was, in effect, reset to its beginning. When now facing these troubling results, prosecutors were tasked with making a challenging decision regarding how to proceed with the case. Determined not to lose hope, friends and family gathered resources to offer a $5,000 reward for any information that could lead to the apprehension of the killer. The detectives shared this disappointment, but wasted no time expanding their efforts. It was a huge blow for them. In response, the detectives were determined and made every effort to leave no stone unturned to get to the answers of the case. They immediately began collecting DNA samples from everyone within Tyshika's social and familial circles, hoping to find a match that could lead them to the murderer. Despite these exhaustive efforts, no matches were found, leaving the case frustratingly unresolved and casting a cloud of uncertainty over how to proceed. Despite strong beliefs that the perpetrator was someone close to either Alonza or Tyshika, the case seemed at risk of remaining unresolved, leaving everyone involved feeling increasingly unsettled and desperate for answers. Months passed without any new leads in the investigation of Tyshika's murder. Then on September 14, 2005, a year and 3 months after the incident, detectives received the breakthrough they desperately needed. The orange juice container, which detectives had strongly suspected might be crucial to the case, indeed proved to be a pivotal piece of evidence. The State Police Crime Lab called to report a match for the fingerprint found on the orange juice container in Tyshika's apartment. The print belonged to a man named Richard Blanks, who had recently applied for a job where fingerprinting was part of the background check. His prints were entered into the system and soon after flagged as a match. This discovery set detectives on a rapid quest to uncover who Richard Blanks was and his possible connection to Tyshika. In their initial research, detectives found that Richard had previously lived in Cambridge and had no criminal record. He graduated from South Dorchester High School in 1986 in Cambridge and served in the United States Marine Corps from 1986 to 1990, then moved around to find work before returning to Cambridge. Until this point, Richard's name had not surfaced in the investigation, but it didn't take long for detectives to unearth a link. Richard was the longtime boyfriend of Tyshika's friend from work, Lisa Pender, with whom he fathered 2 children. This raised questions of whether the presence of Richard's fingerprint on the orange juice container was sufficient to consider him a suspect. Given the friendship with Tyshika and Lisa, it was conceivable that Richard could have visited Tyshika's apartment socially prior to the murder. Seeking clarity about Richard Blanks, the detectives swiftly brought Lisa Pender back for questioning. They began by asking if she was still in a relationship with Richard, to which she responded they had broken up. The detectives then inquired whether Richard knew Tyshika, and Lisa confirmed that he did. She elaborated that the 3 of them would occasionally hang out together, sometimes at her and Richard's place. However, when questioned whether Richard had ever visited Tyshika's apartment, Lisa was evasive and failed to provide a clear answer. Despite Lisa's lack of direct answers, the detectives gathered enough information to secure a search and seizure warrant. This warrant was critical not only to confirm the fingerprints, but also to obtain a DNA sample from Richard, which was essential to establish a link between him and the DNA found under Tyshika's fingernails. After the warrant was issued, detectives brought Richard in for questioning. They immediately informed him that the interrogation was concerning Tyshika's case. Richard was initially very cooperative, which led the detectives to wonder if they had apprehended the right person, cautious to avoid repeating the mistakes made with Alonza. There could have been an innocent explanation for Richard's fingerprints on the orange juice container, so detectives proceeded with caution. However, the atmosphere shifted dramatically when they informed Richard about the DNA warrant. He became agitated, hostile, and resistant. The detectives firmly reiterated that they had a warrant and that his compliance was legally mandated, emphasizing there would be consequences if he didn't cooperate. Eventually, detectives succeeded in collecting Richard's DNA. Following the procedure, they released him, given that his connection to the crime scene was so far only linked through the orange juice container. Considering his relationship with Lisa, there may have been a plausible reason for his fingerprints to be found at Tyshika's apartment, but the detectives maintained 24-hour surveillance on him, carefully monitoring his every move. They wanted to ensure they knew his whereabouts when the DNA results came in, ready to act immediately on the findings. The DNA found under Tyshika's fingernails was a crucial piece of evidence. She had fought back during her attack, taking some of her assailant's DNA in the process. If Richard's DNA matched the samples from under Tyshika's nails, it would conclusively identify him as the perpetrator. Then 13 days later, the waiting ended. The crime lab confirmed that the swabs taken from 2 of Tyshika's right fingernails tested positive for blood and have intermingled profiles consistent with that of Tyshika and Richard Blanks. The DNA extracted from one of her left fingernails and a bloodstain on her shirt matched Tyshika's DNA profile and contained a small indication of DNA from another person who could be Richard. It was finally confirmed that Tyshika was able to take some of Richard's DNA as she fought for her life on that fateful morning. Armed with conclusive hard evidence, detectives arrested Richard Blanks on September 27, 2005, nearly 16 months after Tyshika's tragic death. Richard Blanks was charged with first-degree murder, first and second-degree assault, and reckless endangerment. With the forensic evidence clearly pointing to Richard as the murderer, detectives now faced a new challenge: uncovering the motive. They needed to understand why Richard would commit such a crime against Tyshika, setting the stage for the next phase of the investigation. At this point, neither Richard nor his girlfriend Lisa were cooperating with the investigation, but detectives had gleaned crucial information from another source. In November 2005, a crucial tip came in via an anonymous call that potentially answered the question of motive in Tyshika's murder case. The caller revealed that Lisa had been unfaithful to Richard with a man named Michael. Detectives brought Michael in for questioning, despite his initial reluctance due to receiving numerous threats from Richard. Michael revealed that Richard had confronted him, threatening to harm him and his family if he didn't end the relationship with Lisa Pender. Detectives learned that Richard had threatened to SA Michael's wife and slit her throat if he didn't stop seeing Lisa. However, as serious as the threats were, it didn't stop the two from sneaking around. Michael disclosed that he and Lisa were together on the night of the murder. He recounted that on the night of Tyshika's murder, Lisa received a call from Tyshika. He overheard Lisa pleading with Tyshika not to reveal her whereabouts to Richard. This information led detectives to theorize that Richard had gone to Tyshika's apartment that night in search of Lisa, suspecting she was with someone else. Detectives further surmised that Lisa's evasiveness during earlier questioning either stemmed from her piecing together why they were questioning her about Richard, or from her fear of Richard, who she described as abusive and someone she feared would take her life. To verify Michael's account, detectives checked Tyshika's phone records, confirming the call he mentioned. This call had previously gone unnoticed, as detectives had not yet linked it to Lisa. Detectives further discovered that on the evening of the incident, Richard had made repeated attempts to contact Lisa, who did not respond. He called her multiple times, persistently and in quick succession, with some calls lasting 30 seconds and others just 10 seconds. Most of these calls were concentrated between 11 p.m. and midnight, indicating a pattern of urgent and repeated attempts to reach her during that hour. By May 2006, Richard Blanks' trial was underway. Prosecutors presented a theory that Richard had the means, opportunity, and motive for the murder. They believed that Richard was incensed, out looking for Lisa, so he went to her good friend Tyshika's to find out what she knew. Tyshika knew that Lisa was seeing someone else and had information on who this boyfriend was. They argued that Tyshika, being friends with Lisa and unaware of any threat, likely let Richard into her apartment. Once inside, an altercation ensued when Richard demanded Tyshika call Lisa to find out her location. Tyshika's refusal to divulge the information after speaking with Lisa probably escalated the situation, leading to her murder. Tyshika became collateral damage in Richard's quest for revenge against Lisa. Prosecutors highlighted that Tyshika's desperate fight for her life led to Richard's DNA being left under her fingernails, and his fingerprints on the orange juice container was a result of him taking a drink in a moment of exhaustion after the attack. This became a pivotal piece of evidence linking him to the crime scene. At his trial, Richard Blanks employed two defense strategies. The first was anticipated by the prosecution. He suggested that Alonza Dennis, Tyshika's ex-boyfriend, was the actual killer. However, it was Richard's second line of defense that caused a stir in the courtroom. Contradicting his statements in which he claimed never to have visited Tyshika's apartment, Richard suddenly declared on the stand that he had been having an affair with Tyshika. The unexpected revelation sent shockwaves through the courtroom, challenging the narrative that had been established by the evidence gathered. Richard claimed from the stand that his relationship with Tyshika was purely sexual, suggesting that his frequent visits were for this reason alone. Richard claimed that he had sex with her the night of her murder, but the results from Tyshika's autopsy indicated otherwise. The results concluded that she had no sexual intercourse, no bodily fluids, no drugs, and no alcohol in her system. To the prosecution, however, this assertion was seen as nothing more than a desperate attempt to smear Tyshika's reputation and to mitigate the evidence against him. They argued that Richard's narrative was crafted to explain away the presence of his DNA under Tyshika's fingernails and on the orange juice container, rather than as a statement of fact. This line of defense particularly distressed Tyshika's mother, Diane, who was present in the courtroom. She was horrified to hear Richard portray her daughter in such a manner, adding to the anguish she had already endured. The prosecutor contended that Richard's shocking claims were merely further victimization of Tyshika, an attempt to tarnish her memory in a bid to save himself. During the trial, the medical examiner provided crucial testimony stating it took at least 3 to 5 minutes to strangle Tyshika to death. To illustrate the violent nature of her murder, the prosecutor conducted a dramatic demonstration, standing silently before the jury for 4 minutes, illustrating the length and violence of the attack. This approach proved effective. On May 30th, 2006, after 1.5 hours of deliberation, Richard Blanks was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison, providing Tyshika's loved ones with a sense of justice. However, the resolution was not to last. In 2008, an appellate court overturned Richard's conviction. The basis for the appeal was a procedural error during the trial. The court found that the prosecutor had inappropriately questioned Richard about private conversations with his lawyer, thereby violating attorney-client privilege. This decision erased the initial verdict, casting uncertainty once again over the pursuit of justice for Tyshika. 6 long years passed after Tyshika's tragic death before preparations for a second trial got underway. With a new prosecutor taking over from the one who had resigned, the evidence from the first trial was re-examined. Determined to counteract Richard's anticipated defense that Alonza was the true perpetrator, the new prosecutor strategically highlighted Alonza's genuine distress by playing for the jury the 911 call he made, demonstrating his emotional turmoil to the jury. During this retrial, Richard attempted a different tactic. He visibly cried in front of the jury, aiming to evoke sympathy. However, the jury was not swayed by his tears. After only 6 hours of deliberation, they reached a unanimous verdict. Richard Blanks was once again convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment, providing a renewed sense of justice and relief to Tyshika's family and friends. The circumstantial evidence, including the scratches and the presence of the tan car, ultimately proved to be coincidental. Alonza Dennis was found to be completely innocent of any involvement in Tyshika's murder. After the charges were dropped, Alonza was able to regain custody of his son, restoring their family unit. What do you think about this case? Tyshika paid the ultimate price to protect her friend. If placed in a similar situation, would you do the same? Were you surprised about who the murderer turned out to be? Tyshika's family believes that Richard did not act alone, and that those who assisted him are still freely walking the streets. If you were on the jury, would you have believed Richard's claim that he was in an intimate relationship with Tyshika? Early in the investigation, the detectives saw Alonza as disingenuous on the 911 call. How effective do you think the prosecutor's use of the 911 call was in demonstrating Alonza's innocence? Let's continue the conversation down in the comments section below. As always, I'll meet you there. In these stories, there are no perfect victims or people, only imperfect individuals playing various life roles. Like us, these victims have been caring friends, devoted siblings, loving parents, and supportive partners. If we can acknowledge that these roles show their capacity for love and dedication, then we can also acknowledge that they have touched lives in many ways that merit gratitude. This is why I extend my thanks to the victims for being beacons of love and light despite their flaws. So thank you, Tyshika, for being an example of love and light. May you rest in eternal peace.